Hello everyone, welcome back to our Bio 202 Laboratory Lecture Series. Today we are going to continue our discussion of the circulatory system. Now that we've covered the blood, we're going to move on to the next central component of that system, which is the heart. So the goals for today's lecture series are to be able to describe the general location, size, and shape of the heart, be able to identify the gross anatomy, specifically the major vessels, chambers, anatomical landmarks, and structures of the heart, be able to define and distinguish between the pulmonary and systemic circuits, be able to trace the flow of blood through the heart, and lastly, identify and describe the histological traits of cardiac muscle tissue. So before we actually get into the actual anatomy of the heart, let's take a brief minute to go over the general and anatomical structures of the heart. So the functions of the heart as it sits in our body is largely just to circulate blood. There are other functions that you can kind of tack into this, but for the most part it's to circulate blood. And with the circulation of blood comes the movement of oxygen, CO2, waste, nutrients, etc. So it's a pretty essential organ for our daily lives. Now, I do want to make a quick point to distinguish the cardiovascular versus the circulatory systems. The circulatory systems includes the heart, the blood vessels, and the blood, whereas the cardiovascular system simply refers to the heart and the blood vessels themselves. Now, there are two major divisions of the circulatory system, which again is comprised of the heart, the blood vessels, and the blood. The pulmonary circuit is what is responsible for taking deoxygenated blood from the heart to the lungs, getting it oxygenated, and returning it back to the heart itself. The systemic circuit, or the left part of the heart, is responsible for pumping that blood not to the lungs, but to the system, to the peripheral vasculature in the arms, the legs, the abdomen, the head, etc. It's responsible for getting blood to the body systems, hence the name systemic circuit. Now, in case you guys were wondering and didn't know this already, your heart is located in the center of the thoracic cavity, directly behind the mediastinum, between the lungs. Okay? The base, the broad portion, is superior. The apex is pointed down in towards the left. You can see these anatomical landmarks, and you can see the heart, how it's situated, protected in that thoracic cavity very well by the rib cage in the image shown on the screen. Now, the major structures that you guys need to be aware of moving forward. We're going to start out on the surface just so you can see a general orientation of the heart, and then we'll revisit these structures in a more detailed look here in just a little bit. But just so you are aware, you have the heart itself, which is about a fist-sized organ that is located right in, again, the center of that thoracic cavity, tilted down and slightly towards the left. Coming out of the heart, on the very top, you have all of the great vessels, or the great arteries carrying blood away from the heart. Those originate on what is known as the base of the heart, or the superior broad border. The opposite of the base is the apex, which is pointed down in towards the left. Now, this might be kind of counterintuitive based on your understanding of the words base, which is usually on the bottom of something, and apex, which is usually the top, but these terms are used to basically describe the general features or the broad anatomical appearance of these structures. So the broad base is to the top and the apex points down and towards the left. Now, like I said before, coming out of that base, you have the aorta, which is one of the major arteries. That's the major artery that carries blood away from the heart to the systemic circuit. And you also have the pulmonary trunk, which carries blood out to the lungs. And we'll take a look at that guy here in just a little bit. Now, we've talked about blood leaving the heart. How does blood get back into the heart? Well, it enters in through one of two vessels known as either the superior or inferior vena cava. And we'll talk about those guys in a little bit more detail here very shortly. The heart itself is enclosed in a fibrous sac known as the pericardial sac. We'll talk about this again in just a little bit. But these are just some of the general features that I want you to be aware of as we move forward in today's lecture series. Now here I'm going to guide you through a sort of dissection, as it were, in the cadaver to show you the different layers that ultimately protect the heart and encapsulate it within that thoracic cavity. So superficially we have the skin. Moving one layer lower, you remove that skin, we have the thoracic wall made up of the ribs and all of the musculature. Moving just deep to that, we have the right lung and we have the left lung, and situated right in the middle beneath that sternum, we have the heart and its associated vasculature. And here's what it looks like all cleaned up. Again, that apex pointing down towards that left, the base superiorly with the aorta, pulmonary trunk right there, and lastly you have that superior vena cava coming in right there. Now, to orient the heart properly, the base again goes up towards the superior border, the apex points down and towards the left, the auricles, which are these little ear-like structures, these little ear-like flaps, are facing anteriorly, okay? And the apex points down and towards the left. That is how the heart is properly oriented. And I want you guys to take a minute and let that sink in, because it's going to be very relevant. If you're confronted with an image of the heart, it's going to be important that you first orient that heart properly, and then second, try and identify whatever you're being asked to identify in that image or specimen. Okay. And here is what an actual cadaver heart looks like. Base pointing superiorly, apex pointing down towards the left, the auricles are pointed anteriorly. Okay. So this heart is properly oriented. Again, this is just some landmarks for you to be aware of as you move forward in today's lecture series and as you practice identifying the various structures of the heart. And that concludes our general overview of the heart. We'll reconvene here in just a few short minutes with another lecture going more in depth into the actual gross anatomy of the heart itself. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you here shortly.